Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy, powered by TrustArc. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart, Ralph O'Brien, and Dr. Kay Royal.
When you work on compliance issues inside an organization, it can be a continuous discussion. If it is legal, does it then automatically mean that it is a good idea? And is the fact that we can process personal data, does that also mean that we should? Ethics in this time when common norms and decency sometimes suddenly seem up for debate, it's a good time to talk about it, I think. And who better to do that than with Miss IG Geek, also known as Rowenna Fielding, an independent data protection and ethics consultant based in the UK. You've heard from her before, back in season 3, but we are very happy she joins us now for a full episode. My name is Paul Breitbart.
My name is Ralph O'Brien.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. Thank you, Ro, for coming back and talking to us. We still like you.
Is that supposed to mean we still like you?
You said we had her back again. I'm like, yeah, we still like you. You're good. Come on back.
Of course we like Ro.
Of course we like Ro. We love Ro. Let's just be honest. Okay, so unexpected question. If you could be any age for a week, what age would you be?
I think I would be 3.
Why 3?
Because the world's just starting to make sense, but nobody expects too much of you.
Okay, I like that.
And also you can have tantrums about stuff and people be like, oh, it's just the age.
She's so cute.
Yeah, exactly.
At what point did we start thinking that screaming at something because we're unhappy was not a cool thing to do?
And no bills to pay, any of that stuff.
I'll go the other end of the spectrum. I'll go 73 because I think you can get away with stuff when you're an old person that you can't when you're younger.
But I like it. 73. Paul?
I would probably go back to being 24 again, somewhere early 20s.
Why 24?
Well, 24 is my lucky number, but just going back into my 20s and see with the experience I've gained, if life would be really different, knowing a bit more about life and how people are and how people react to things. And yeah, I think that would be a good age to go back to.
There's a big difference between going back and going back with your current knowledge. That's a huge difference.
That's certainly true, but that was not excluded in the question, so that's the way I interpret it.
If it's silent, it's there. The first thing that came to mind was the same thing Rose said, 3, and then I was debating 2. Because at 2, you're just now learning to talk, so you can say all kinds of weird words to people in whatever order you want. No one expects you to really make sense either. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who would love to go back to a time before I spoke. But by the way, for the record, I'm pretty sure I was very verbose as a 2-year-old too.
Why is nobody of us surprised?
Nobody's going to surprise that. But no, I was thinking too, for that same reason. But on the other hand, the things that I have, the real memories about, other than, growing up or whatever, were like in first grade. So like I was 5. And I remember those. I loved the teachers. I loved going to the library. I was one of the freaks that would help people with math homework and help grade people. As a 5-year-old, I was walking around with a red marker grading people's math stuff. I had fun. And that might be the last time I recall actually having fun in school was first grade.
No. So,
bless her.
Segue alert. Talking about howling into the void.
Having fun?
Yeah. Talking about howling into the void and being able to scream and have tantrums. Data ethics, right?
Hey, that was really digging for a segue there, Ralph. I'm not sure how smart that one was.
That was a little
But Ro, over to you, data ethics, which I was just talking to someone. Apparently there's a law proposed in UK that companies are going to have to appoint an AI ethics officer or something if it passes or whatever. Yeah, let's dive in on data ethics.
One of the challenges in talking to people about ethics is that ethics means whatever you think it means. There are plenty of people out there who've come up with definitions for ethics and data ethics in particular, but because an ethical system is a value system, it's what do you believe in, what do you feel is right, it's very difficult to agree on a universal system of what's right and what's wrong. I think in the whole history of humankind, we've never been able to agree 100% between all of us on what's right and what's wrong. It's like that XKC cartoon where there's 10 standards. I have come up with a standard that will unify all of these previous standards. And then the next window, there are 11 standards.
It's when you put 5 data protection professionals in a room and come out with 15 opinions on how it should work, right?
So I generally take the approach that's been put together by the Open Data Institute, the ODI, who I did my data ethics practitioner certificate with. And that's basically paying attention to whatever it is you're doing with data in order to avoid causing people harm. That's not the exact wording, but yeah, in general, the data ethics approach is that I see most commonly is avoiding doing people harm, avoiding doing society harm, and avoiding doing the environment harm, which is it's quite big. The problem with that is that it's really hard with data to predict data harms because data harms are stochastic effects.
Right.
You can predict what harm is going to occur, but it's because of the element of the complexity, it's actually impossible to pinpoint where, when, and to whom any particular harm will occur, which allows the standard corporate risk management model, likelihood times impact, to completely discount the idea of data harms because it can't be quantified and it can't be pinpointed. Therefore, it can be considered not to exist.
But we've seen that in court cases as well. We've seen court cases on both sides of the UK and on the continent kind of go both ways as this idea of loss of control of data. In Europe, we've seen court cases that say, oh, you've lost control of data, that's a harm. And in the UK, we've seen cases that say, so what? You've lost the data, so what? How have you been hurt by that? Just not having your data is
Right.
not the same as your data being used to hurt you. But then going back to your point, does that hurt come 5, 10, 15 years afterwards? And how can you trace that back to the breach in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. And even when a breach isn't concerned, like the long tail effects of processing personal data about people, because data is infinitely replicable. Your name is your name, no matter who's got a copy of it. It's actually impossible to do that back tracing on an individual basis. And there's quite a few academics who are looking at the bigger picture in terms of data harms, like the ones who discovered when they did a sort of bird's eye view that the advertising targeting algorithm on Facebook was excluding African-American Facebook users from ads for housing, jobs, financial assistance. Also, women are disproportionately less likely to be shown ads for jobs in science, technology, engineering, medicine. But you won't know those things if you try and look at it on an individual level because you've got to have something to compare it to.
Right.
And that's why data ethics it's much more of a preventative harm avoidance approach than it is basically trying to play whack-a-mole with liability, which is what a lot of data protection practice ends up being.
Unfortunately, yes. So when you come into an organization, when they decide we want to spend money on this and we want somebody who is honest with us and can really guide us do things right, and they decide to hire you, which I can imagine is not for everybody because you are brutally honest. How would you come in? Where would you start?
Usually, I prefer to start having a nice, fairly informal sit-down chat with members of senior management. Say, what is it you're trying to achieve? Why? What do you want to be? It's easy to say, oh, I want to be ethical. well, what does that look like? And one of the key questions I tend to ask is, if slavery were made legal tomorrow, would your organization dive in there with the economic benefits it would accrue? And most of the time they'll be, oh, no, slavery's terrible, rah, rah. But I encourage them to dig into that and say, there's all sorts of things that are not legal at the moment, which you are either doing or participating in. What really makes you think that there's a line? And usually what I find is there's a tendency in organizations to go, okay, we're all nice people with good intentions, therefore our default path will always be to take
You're ethical.
choice. Yeah, exactly. And they don't realize that unless you sit down and have hard conversations about the what ifs and the conflicting imperatives and who benefits and who is harmed, then they can't guarantee at all that the choices they make will be ethical. So it's really a matter of getting past that sort of cognitive blind spot where people assume that not having intention to do harm is enough. And in the age of data technology, it's nowhere near enough. It is far easier, cheaper, and faster to use data tech in harmful ways than it is to use it in a way that protects other people.
And of course, you have to take into account things that we've talked on this podcast before about it also depends on the cultural mores and the context.
Absolutely.
Because that's also going to drive what's ethical, right? Like you said, if we made slavery legal, would companies go in on slavery? You can say the same thing about putting your 10-year-old daughters up for marriage or having multiple spouses or doing certain things. It also depends on the mores of the area that you're in as well, even though the majority of the developed countries would probably agree on a certain set of behaviors across the board. But that's what's driving a company's intention of being ethical. What do they mean by that? Right?
Absolutely. And it's also, who do you want to be? Are you happy with being the people who did harm, even if no one can trace it to you? Or are you not happy with the idea that you might have inadvertently caused harm, even if you'll never be held accountable? And those are really hard questions to deal with. And there's no right or wrong answers. It's just to get an idea of the organization's sort of cultural thinking and risk tolerance. And usually also what falls out of that is gaps in their sort of governance and accountability structures as well.
No, and it comes with a lot of shades of gray, and it's not immediately a data protection example, but one of the tech scale-ups here in the Netherlands announced last week that they will be closing all of their Dutch offices, leaving the Netherlands for other countries, because they consider that the investment climate in the Netherlands for them doesn't work. There is not enough of venture capital to be raised, but more importantly, the Dutch and European labor laws are too restrictive because they can't find people who are willing to work 6 or 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day without complaining. And just having everybody working 35 or 40 hours a week, that doesn't bring them anywhere. So they want people to work more, but that is not allowed under labor laws. So they leave the country.
And wasn't there also that German, I know I always come back to this as my example, but the German high court case about sexual harassment, I think it was for a U.S. company, but it was their German office. And the court dismissed it, saying you are not going to push your U.S. prudish ideas down on us. So ethics isn't always law either, right? Because if the company was following the law and it's owned by a U.S. company, therefore, ergo, goes the U.S. law. But if it's against the cultural mores of the country, then you're subject to what the courts would decide there.
You can't promise the law that the law is ethical. It's a mirror of our current society.
That's true, too. It's made by men or women, people, made by people.
You could say it's a mirror of our current society, perhaps, but we've seen plenty of laws passed, I would say, are not ethical behaviours. Going back to Roseball, at one point slavery was legal. At one point, dunking witches in ponds was legal.
Women, dunking women in ponds. They were they didn't torture witches, they tortured women.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Pretty sure I'd be dunked if that was modern.
Oh, me too, totally. I would be going swimming.
But would you float?
I would be getting totally up on that bonfire. I'd have the marshmallows out.
It's only funny because it's close to true.
But as people like to say, oh, data ethics, that's completely different from data protection. In fact, I heard a lawyer say yesterday, there is no room for ethics in data protection.
Wow.
Really? I need to cross them off my list. You don't have to give me their name right now in public, but
Ralph, why did you say that?
That didn't sit right with me, because if you look at all the recital and the first article of the GDPR, it says the processing of personal data shall be for the benefit of, it says mankind, so I'm going to say humankind. That in itself is an ethical stance. And also the GDPR talks about upholding, protecting fundamental rights and freedoms. Again, those are ethics-based laws that were created in response to the horrors of what happens when you don't have those kinds of codes that can be enforced and made accountable. I would disagree.
And it sets a floor, right? It sets a
That's
floor.
the idea.
But it doesn't. I go into organizations and have these conversations which are like, and they all start by saying, oh, I want to do ethical behaviors and do good ethical things. And I say, oh, brilliant. Then this is what's involved and this is the thinking that you've got to do. And they say, oh, okay, what does the law say? And then I tell them what the law says. And then they go, oh, what's the risk?
Yep, every time.
This kind of drive to the bottom, this kind of lowest common denominator. What can I ignore? What can I get away with? Because there are...
Yeah, what is the actual risk that this would happen? And you're like sitting here going, okay, the risk of you getting caught might actually be very low. The penalties, if you are caught, are extremely high. You may be forbidden from doing business in certain areas of the world, or you may, be reprimanded, put in jail, whatever the penalties may be. So you've got a small risk of discovery. Is that what drives your ethical behavior? Is that you're not going to be found?
Yeah.
Which is, because that doesn't make it ethical.
And it's also not compliance, because the GDPR doesn't say you must balance the risk of getting found out with the burden of doing right by people. It says you must do right by people.
The likelihood of getting caught is not part of the GDPR?
It's really not.
I cannot make that part of my assessment?
His weight covers the shocks. It shouldn't be certainly shouldn't be part of the legitimate interests or purpose compatibility or data protection impact assessment. But those aren't always done according to how the law helpfully specifies they should be. That's too much work, and it gives answers that people don't want to deal with. I think that one of the biggest problems in trying to be a professional in data ethics is that it's not something that can be commodified, automated. You can't just create a template pack and a checklist or a piece of software that tells you what the answers are. It requires people to think. And the trend in the modern workplace is to devalue intellectual labor in favor of motion, and things look like productivity metrics rewards motion rather than thinking. So as long as you look like you're doing something, you'll be incentivized to carry on. But taking the time out to really think something through, research it, critique it, analyze it, that just looks like dead time to the metric systems.
Yeah.
So there isn't a lot of room left for people to do the thinking.
There's really not. But I want to go back to something you said earlier, that privacy and data protection laws are at their heart ethics, or we can turn it the other way around. AI, let's go with AI since you just mentioned that. AI ethics or AI laws are intrinsically privacy and data protection laws. And even for people to understand what the laws require, if we go that direction, they have to understand the other side. So if they want to understand data protection and privacy laws, they have to understand ethics. If they want to understand ethics laws or requirements, they need to understand the trap for personal data, data protection, privacy, things like that. So as you're saying, it requires thinking, but it also takes it out of the realm of what most business owners would be able to understand, because the terminology used to drive decisions or to tell you what to think about or tell you what route you're supposed to go down, if we're looking at regulations and laws, are typically data protection and privacy terms, things such as simple as process and data transfers and things like that. And so that in and of itself removes it from the realm of business people being able to make the decision all in themselves.
I mean, we have basically created a world that is impossible for any human being to keep up with.
Mm-hmm. True.
Right.
So that doesn't help. And the sheer volume and velocity and complexity of data flying around, it is, as you say, it's impossible to keep up with. I think,
and I think it was a very awkward way of me saying it takes more than one person to make a decision.
Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely. Although somebody has to have the ultimate kind of go, no-go authority.
Yeah.
And I find that is often missing both in data protection and data ethics practice in organizations. Yeah. The upper echelons of the organization basically put out a policy that says you must follow the law and use reasonable judgment, and then leave it to the frontline people to try and figure out what that means with the pressures of their business role, obviously skewing them to whatever is fastest, cheapest and easiest, not what actually produces the effects that the law is intended to promote. Yeah.
And what's perverse is a business at its heart is a legal entity that's created to make money and perpetuate its success, which is not quite the same as saying don't hurt people, right? Because you could make the most money by hurting people, right? You could get the most business success by exploiting people or exploiting their data or causing data harms. And so to actually have laws, health and safety laws, anti-slavery laws, money laundering laws, data protection laws, add these restrictions on business, it's a really, we've already seen people, as Paul was saying earlier, moving out of, the European markets to say, oh, I'll go somewhere where I'm not so tightly regulated, where I can hurt people.
But let's not forget, those are the exceptions, right? Because for the vast majority of companies, they don't necessarily want to be a bad guy. They don't necessarily want to hurt people. No. They have no intent of misusing all the personal data that they have, but they do want to use it. And as part of them doing business, they may not always be able to make the choice that would be the best choice for the human being or the best choice in terms of data protection, because that would basically shut them down. Think about online advertising. We all here probably detest all the cookies and trackers and things like that, but we also know that they work and that they lead to a lot of new business for companies that use the advertising.
And a lot of people like them.
And if I'm the scale up and I want to make some money, then I will use that advertising. This even consider if I have some safeguards in place on how to use the advertising and maybe only do high level targeting, then for me, that might be the ethical thing to do. Whereas for us fundamentalists, that may still be the wrong thing.
It's an interesting point you raised, the behavioral advertising, because all of the studies conducted outside the advertising industry show that it doesn't really work all that well. Contextual advertising is still more effective at bringing customers in and repeat business than the behavioral advertising. It's just that the whole internet now has been captured by the surveillance advertising industry and made dependent. They're like the smack dealers of the internet. Now everybody's hooked and it's really hard to get away from it. But so there's this idea floating around that it's a necessary evil, but it's actually an unnecessary evil.
Yeah, and I was just using it as an example, right? There could be many other ways in which data processing could be borderline ethical or borderline unethical, but we have so many shades of gray here. So how would you deal with those dilemmas as an organization?
I have my own opinions about the line between right and wrong, but I try not to impose those on the organizations I'm dealing with. Generally, if organizations that come to me, they come to me because they sincerely want to do right by people. They're just not entirely sure how. So I guess I functioned as a sort of therapist for the corporate personhood, interrogating the motives and what does
I
it you
love that.
feel about that? And do you think that if somebody did that to you, would you be okay with it? And yeah, it's helping people come to decisions for themselves rather than telling them what's right and what's wrong. In data protection, you can tell them what's right and what's wrong, not so much in data ethics.
Yeah, it feels to me more like the capability of giving them the mechanisms to stop and think, to put in.
Yeah, therapy.
Yeah, to put into any new product, any new system, any new piece of software, that capability rather than to say, can I just stop and ask the question, should I? And have a serious conversation about what controls you want and why before you go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And also setting out red lines, fuzzy red lines, because all lines when it comes to ethics are fuzzy and permeable, but just setting out is there anything that this corporate person, this brand would not do? You could get a 5% increase in income generation by having the head of your competitor gunned down in the street, would you? Kind of thing. It's much easier to make ethical decisions once you've decided which lines you would really prefer not to cross than it is to try and do it in the moment with other pressures, perverse incentives, and the here and now, the pressure, get this done, weighing in. If you can take a step back and go, okay, actually, but the output of doing this comes really close to our red lines. So maybe we should think about another way of doing this. It's much easier to have conversations about ethics when the ethical dilemma isn't right on the table in front of you.
Yeah, when it's in the abstract, rather than applied ethics.
And then, so for a company, it sounds like what you're recommending is one person is not in charge of the ethics, that maybe there should be a guidance committee. What roles in the company should be in on that, and who should be helping make the decision, and how often should they be reviewing
Standard
it?
data protection person's answer, it depends.
I love that answer.
Whatever works.
I like that. Whatever works.
Whatever works, yeah. There's a lot of thinking that's already been done around this in the disciplines of human research and medicine. We have ethics frameworks for all sorts of the legal profession. So reinventing the wheel isn't necessary, but tinkering about with the components that are already there. Okay, maybe you're going to make the CEO ultimately accountable, but the CEO is going to need to have people around them giving them the relevant information, and they can't all be yes people. There needs to be a contrarian or two in there as well. And that also means carving out time and space to have these discussions. And I think also a lot of raising awareness of cognitive bias, not in a you're bad people because you're biased way, but in a this is how human minds work. If you want to make decisions based on reason and good information, then you need to bear in mind that when you feel strongly about something, you're going to probably encounter some of these cognitive blind spots.
Yeah. So one of those blind spots that I've been looking at a lot recently, because I've been doing a lot of AI training out there, is the very simple idea of human beings will often take easy and wrong over complex and right. The fact that an AI result looks like magic means you're vastly easily to accept it rather than question it in search of a better or a best answer. And so I think one more question for you here then, Ro, is how do you affect that change in terms of people and people's competence and time to go and think? I know competency is something that you're hugely a fan of and has in fact produced a framework on recently. But so how do we give people that time and space to think and make sure they are competent and able to question when otherwise, as humans, we just blindly accept and go along with the answers?
I mean, there is no good answer to how do you keep people on target in relation to their understanding of their ethical appetite, because constant vigilance is the only answer to that, really. But in terms of constant vigilance, and not surveillance, not top-down overlords looking at the peons. It means for individuals to do constant self-assessment. Like, why do I think this? Why do I feel like this? Why am I so convinced that this shiny data fairy is going to solve all my problems? For example, that you touched on the competency thing, and yeah, I created a framework for data protection competencies, because what I observed was that there's a whole lot of training out there which kind of operates on the principle that you can just like patch a body of knowledge into a person's brain and then they will just go away and apply it the right way.
It doesn't work that way?
No, oddly enough, the past for 8 decades of educational psychology has come to the conclusion that no, humans don't work like that. You can't just tell someone stuff and expect them to change.
Well, I've got a CFE. I must be able to do it right.
I'm teaching ECPCB, so I must also be able to do it right.
And I'm just sitting here listening to them, so therefore I must also.
But the metrics there are for training, none of them really include effectiveness because it's so hard to do. And when your business is centered around providing training, you're selling training. You're not selling competency. That might be your marketing hook, but you as a business can't afford to actually follow up to see whether or not your training is effective because you're busy selling training. But for employers particularly, and for data protection professionals themselves and other people, there needs to be a way to not necessarily measure, but at least evaluate whether or not you're putting into practice the things that you've learned consistently. And so I created these competencies, which are simple statements like, you understand which parts of your role involve processing personal data, really simple stuff like that. And built this framework, and it's not a hierarchy. It's got 5 tracks. So there's the people who just work with data, personal data, info handlers. There's business process owners. There's executives. There's data protection professionals, and there's ICT people. So you don't progress through a set of levels because that sort of structure is usually quite arbitrary. Instead, you pick and mix from the tracks that apply to your role. So I created this as licensed under Creative Commons. Anyone can take it and use it. If they want to make money off it, then they have to come and talk to me first. But it's
rightfully,
yes, indeed, because it was a lot of work. But I'm hoping I've been hoping that it would take off, and it's starting to get some interest. The problem is it is virtually impossible to monetize because it focuses on outcomes, not revenue generation.
Very good. I have one final easy question for you before we wrap up.
Yes.
How to ensure that you get buy-in from senior leadership and the board?
Don't work for sociopaths for a start. Seriously, that's the only way you can ensure that the senior management will get on board with the idea of giving a damn about anything other than the organization's profit. Don't work for sociopaths because you're in a losing battle if you do. But no, the other part of it, I do a lot of work.
So I won't work in the White House then?
Not this administration, certainly. I think, I do a lot of work in the third sector, and that's quite something of an easier sell there because people in charities, they're trying to be the good guys already. And so if you go to them and say, look, being the good guys in this day and age means more than just looking kind of 2 inches in front of you. You've got to look 2 miles in front of you because data tech has massive ripple effects. Let's talk about that so that you're not the bad guys, because the bad guys don't care about people and you do. Yes. It's a little harder to make that argument in commercial practice, but then you talk about things like brand safety, attracting and retaining the best people, having a good corporate culture. Also, the fact that if you do this stuff in good faith from the outset, then you're in a much better position to adapt to changes in detail from legislation. Whereas if you go in with the what's the bare minimum attitude, you're going to be playing whack-a-mole with compliance requirements forever. And that's probably more expensive in the long run. But yeah, again, like there's no one answer. The answer is whatever works. So whether you appeal to people's humanity or their ego or their wallet or their identity as a member of a certain community, yeah, whatever it takes to persuade them that caring about other people in the absence of imminent liability is a good idea. Yeah, we use whatever.
We've certainly managed to get ourselves an episode title for this. I think whatever works, whatever it takes is going to be the episode.
These are two very different things. Whatever works is much more tightly bounded than whatever it takes.
Very short. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us again, Ro. Stay on for a bit more news about what has happened in privacy in the past couple of days.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so current news, what's going on? I think there was something about a State of the Union address last night that I have not listened to yet, so I can't give you anything there.
I don't believe the word privacy was mentioned there.
No, but I saw that there was a couple of people who had to be removed by the Sergeant at Arms for interrupting.
I saw that too. And I saw also that Congress has reintroduced COPPA 2.0, the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, is back on the schedule.
Oh, I thought we passed that one. Maybe it was something else that we passed. I'm flipping out. Okay.
I'm not sure if we've mentioned it on the podcast before, but the encryption wars are starting again. We've received word, obviously, here in the UK that Apple is turning off all of its encryption services for the UK user.
Yes.
rather than giving a backdoor to the government. And we're very seeing similar in Sweden as well. Signal is apparently going to exit Sweden rather than dilute message security. So I think this is a trend we're seeing across the world at the moment of governments trying to ask or issue backdoors in encryption and security, and companies, rather than weakening the security of their user base, deciding just simply not to operate in jurisdictions.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. And I saw indeed an interview with the CEO of Signal here in the Netherlands in one of the news broadcasts, where she also made very clear, we will never share data with law enforcement or government because we don't have data that we can share.
Never say never.
Yeah, and I think that's where Apple's thought process is as well. Apple's services are encrypted at rest. And, they were asked by the UK to put in a backdoor so that the UK could break through that encryption, or the UK law enforcement could. And they said, rather than, put the entire user base at danger, because that backdoor would become available to anybody eventually, rather than do that, they would just quit the UK and make sure that the UK people are now not encrypted at all. That's going to be fascinating for anyone who has got cloud accounts and such.
Along the lines of Apple, a federal court in New York issued a preliminary injunction blocking the Department of Government Efficiency for accessing our data held by the U.S. Treasury Department. Apple is the one that sought that. That's interesting.
It is.
All kinds of blocking going on here. Let's see what else we got going on fun. I don't see a whole lot.
The other thing that came out this week is the long-expected evaluation of the Dutch Data Protection Authority.
Yes,
you may recall,
yes.
we spoke about it before. The ministry is actually supposed to do the evaluation of the supervisory authority, and that was supposed to happen a couple of years ago already. But the chair of the Dutch DPA, or in any case the commission, said, no, we actually don't want the ministry to do that because we're an independent body. So we commission our own evaluation. And they did. There's an external committee who has done that, and the report has now been published. And surprise, the report is not very positive about the Dutch DPA. It says that the Data Protection Authority is too much of a closed body. They're inaccessible. They are continuously talking about needing more resources without showing what they're actually doing for the resources.
Yeah.
And there is also some criticism about all of the commission not working full time, which also doesn't seem to be a good fit in this day and age, according to the evaluation report. So I'm planning to do a bigger piece on this evaluation, but that will take a bit of time to really work my way through it.
Yeah.
But there was quite a number of recommendations. And of course, the DPA has said, we'll take these to heart and we will change our approach. But seeing is believing.
I've actually just been asked by Privacy Laws and Business for their magazine to write a piece about the enforcement of the ICO. And I think it's a question of being careful you ask for sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because all of our enforcement sits on economic interests of the country at the moment, which basically means they're not going to do it. So that's a fascinating roundtable. And I also promised I'd do a shout out as well to the UK Data Protection Forum as well. I attended their event, their quarterly event yesterday.
Nice.
And I said that I'd shout them out on the podcast because they're one of the oldest associations going here in the UK. And I think the good work they do is sometimes worth a public acknowledgement.
Absolutely.
So, one of the few organizations out there actually owned by the members for the members, as opposed to being a more private or for-profit organization.
Well done. And that's a good way to end this week's episode.
That was Serious Privacy.
This wraps up our podcast for this week. Please do share the episode with your friends and colleagues because we love to get more listeners. And join the conversation on LinkedIn or on Blue Sky. You'll find us under Serious Privacy on both platforms. You'll find Kay as Heart of Privacy, Ralph as IGR O'Brien, and myself as Europol B. Until next week, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.